Welcome to another edition of Anglican Unscripted. This is episode 40. This is a show where Kevin and George get to sit down and talk about all things Anglican. I'm on location here on the West Coast at AnglicanTV West, and I'm going to be giving my report. I'm about 25 feet off a goose pond, so you're going to hear some background texture noise during the show. I'm Kevin Carlson.
And I'm George Conger, and today is May 18th, 2012.
George, we're going back today in history to 1662, and all the viewers are going, yeah, they're finally going to talk about the Book of Common Prayer. It was this day, or right around here, that King Charles, let this edition rise to the throne, so to speak.
He gave his royal assent after it had been adopted by Parliament as the prayer book of the Church of England.
Yep. Now, what's interesting about this is a prayer book is designed to encapsulate the doctrine and teachings and 39 articles and Psalter. It has a whole lot. The actual title of the Book of Common Prayer is about a paragraph long. I don't know whose bright idea that was. It wasn't a marketing person. And, you know, it's served very well through the test of time, but with every edition there's been a little bit of controversy, including the 1662.
Yes, one of the there have been individual controversies. You know, we have all the fights over the 79 prayer book. We're going to have a prayer book, a new one pretty soon because of inclusive language issues. But behind all that is sort of an uncertainty of where does the prayer book lie in the great scheme of things. When I studied in England, and as you enter Ripon College, Cuddesson, which is a seminary in the Church of England, a theological college, there's an arch over the entranceway, and it has the words lex orandi, lex credendi. The law of praying is the law of believing. And Ripon College, Cuddesson, is sort of the liberal center-left of the Church of England. And it has, for the last 100 or so years, taught that the prayer book is the channel, the guides down which our faith runs. Now, for evangelicals, they're not too keen about that because they say, well, what about the Bible? Should the Bible be informed by the prayer book, or is the prayer book informed by the Bible? And Anglo-Catholics, on the other hand, say, well, we're not too certain because we have tradition and the sacraments, so we don't know if we adopt by this lex orandi, lex credendi. But part of the Anglican heritage has been this tension around the formularies and its liturgy. Do we believe, what we do in the Sunday service? Sure.
And it's really that structure that has been cohesive for so long in the Anglican Church. But, even the 1662, when that was passed, 900 some clergy, had to leave the church because they didn't agree with what was teaching. And that's been kind of the modus operandi every time there's a new prayer book passed. Some people just, have so much difficulty with it, even back in 1662, that they don't want to attend to it.
Today, when I was in seminary 15, 20 years ago, when we would have classes, when we would have chapel, there would be people who would omit or change the words of the different prayers so that it would be gender inclusive. And we've had bishops, and I think Jack Spong for one, who will recite the creeds and the liturgy and not believe any of it. And then there are other people who, this is who they are as a Christian. It's encapsulated in these words. But the Anglican fights over the past generation may have been over women priests, may be over homosexuality, may be over which edition of the prayer book to use, always sort of come back to what is that standard of faith? What is that, we don't have a pope, let's make it the prayer book our pope. And some people want that, and others say, forget it.
And that's the difficulty that we live in. We don't want a magisterium. We do have this guide, this book, this prayer book, which has been, incredible in keeping us together. But we're reaching to the point now where these provinces want to be so autonomous and don't want to be under any structure that the prayer book is an optional thing to them. George, on to story one, we're going to talk about the Episcopal Church and kind of reinventing the wheel. Currently, if you want to partake of the Eucharist in an Anglican or Episcopal Church, there are two requirements. First, you be baptized, and one, you be a believer. Obviously, they don't check your baptismal card on the way in, but there's a general understanding that if you're coming forward for the Eucharist, you understand these two issues. Out in, I guess it's Oregon or out in the Northwest, they're putting a motion forward at General Convention that's going to change that and allow communion to be with anybody, even if they're not baptized.
It's an extraordinary motion. It's asking the Church to ditch 2,000 years of understanding of what happens in the sacrament of the Eucharist.
Sure.
It's trying to break apart what is sacramental from what is secular. It's basically a marketing tool, bringing in people with the attraction of free booze.
Now, I remember a time, and this is back in our Mormon history, our Mormon history, where people who were Mormon did not have to be rebaptized when entering the Episcopal Church, just to make it easier for the bishop at that time.
You're absolutely right, Kevin. Bishop Tuttle, who was the first Episcopal bishop of Utah, when he went out there, he had an issue. What do I do about Mormons who want to become Episcopalians? Do I need to rebaptize them?
Yeah.
And at first he said, yes, I better do this, because a Mormon baptism is not done in the name of the Trinity. It's not a Christian or Trinitarian Christian baptism, so he made them be rebaptized. But after a while he said, I think it would be better as a missionary outreach to allow people who are Mormons to become Episcopalians without rebaptism, because their intent is good. And the baptism, even though it was done in Mormon words and Mormon terms, doesn't need to be thrown out on for being theologically false. Now, so 125, 150 years ago, the Episcopal Church, as a local practice out west, began allowing people who had not been baptized to receive Holy Communion, such that the former bishop of Utah, Carolyn Tanner Irish, was never baptized. She was brought up a Mormon and only confirmed as an adult, but never rebaptized as Episcopalian.
Yeah. Now, which is interesting, because we've always gone through these talks about what part of our liturgies can be considered evangelical, or to go out and bring people in, and how do we use liturgy as an evangelical tool. And here we're trying to make the Eucharist more palatable for, I guess, non-believers or people who are unbaptized. At what point do we say you don't have to believe in Jesus to take the Eucharist?
Well, I would distinguish between an evangelical and evangelistic tool.
Oops, that's what I meant. Sorry.
An evangelical tool would say that, would be about when baptismal regeneration takes place.
Sure.
But as an evangelistic tool, as an outreach and marketing tool, this strategy, I think it's well-intentioned, but I think it's theologically ignorant. But I also think, Kevin, it has no chance of passing. See, even though we like to say...
Wait. I mentioned this is in the Episcopal Church, right?
Yes. I don't think it has any chance of passing, because, sometimes we conflate all of the Episcopal progressive movement into one monolithic body, and that's not so. Catherine Jefferts Shorey, the presiding bishop, can't get on with the head of the House of Deputies, Bonnie Anderson. I mean, there are fights within the left. Now, there is what I would call the affirming Catholic or liberal Catholic movement. Think of Frank Griswold.
Griswold, yeah.
And the dioceses of New York and Connecticut, Massachusetts, places like that. They would no more surrender the requirement of baptism for Eucharist than us good old boys down in the South dragging our knuckles along on the ground. But there are other liberals who are, if you will, more out west, who are sort of post-Christian, post-Episcopalian Episcopalians, like the presiding bishop, who don't see the need for these strictures and rules.
George, on to story 3, we're going to talk about what's called the Anglican Roman Catholic International Commission. people who don't know their history, the Anglicans and Roman Catholics have been fighting since the 16th century. There was a big hullabaloo about divorce, lots of people burning at the stake. It wasn't pretty. Now, many years later, we've had, I guess we're on our third commission. There was one under Pope Paul VI. There's one under Pope John Paul, the nice one, just a couple years ago, and Pope Benedict. This is the third ARSIC convention, meeting of the mind, so to speak. And the goal here is to reunite Anglicans and Roman Catholics together so that we agree and practice the same. But I think they're leaving this latest meeting going, oh, there's never going to be an agreement with the Anglicans.
You're absolutely right, Kevin, and that two things really have come out of this most recent session. The Anglicans and Roman Catholics met in Hong Kong last month, and they were discussing common areas of ethical and moral teaching and common areas of different teaching. Catholics and Anglicans have different understandings about contraception, for example, or about divorce and remarriage. After the meeting, though, the Archbishop of New Zealand, David Moxon, who is a very liberal man, he was the Anglican co-chair of the group, told reporters, well, Anglicans and Roman Catholics have also different ethical understandings of homosexuality.
Really?
And so not only is this extraordinary that we no longer have a shared view of homosexuality and ethical sexual issues, but it underscores the fact that ARCIC is essentially a waste of time for Roman Catholics. See, Roman Catholics have this guy called the Pope, and when the Pope says something, you do it. There's an authority. There's somebody who says what's what and who's who. With Anglicans, the Archbishop of New Zealand, I couldn't care less what he has to say. He has no influence over me. He has no standing. And this guy can go off into La La Land and talk about homosexuality longer being a sin, but it's irrelevant. And that's the problem with the ARCIC talks. Anglicans' representatives there are not representatives. They're just individuals who happen to be on a committee.
Yeah, and we're not putting our best people on those committees. If you give me a list of people, he wouldn't be on a list of any committee that I would assign him to, other than the committee to discuss whether or not we should have other committees, because you would, of course, say yes. And that's kind of the ridiculous thing that's going on here is nobody who represents true Anglicanism ever gets on these committees. I don't think C.S. Lewis wouldn't have made it. Cranmer wouldn't have made it. The list goes on, and it's just so frustrating that the Roman Catholics, they sit down, they think they're talking to like-minded people, and all of a sudden a person stands up, well, we don't agree with this homosexual thing, and oh no, what, 3 generations of talks with the Roman Catholics out the window, and all because somebody didn't read Lambeth 110, which is the understanding of the Anglican communion, because that's what it says in Lambeth 110.
Well, you shouldn't be too hard on Archbishop Moxon, because he's just stating what he believes.
Yes.
It's the whole structure is flawed from the very beginning. See, no matter what they agree with in these ARCIC meetings, it can bind the Catholic Church by the act of the Pope, but nothing can bind Anglicans. So to come to some sort of common mind on something is inherently impossible when you're dealing with Anglicans.
Yeah. Ugh. George, on to our 4th story. I'm going to give you a real shocking story. The Diocese of New Hampshire is going to have an election tomorrow for a new bishop. Gene Robinson has decided to step aside, retire. That's what bishops do. In the Episcopal Church, it's one of the good things bishops do. And there's new candidates. So there's 3 candidates. 2 are heterosexual and 1 is homosexual. And here's the problem with the story. If I told you this in 2002 or 2001, you would have been shocked, freaked out, and say, well, we need to do something because this is going to split the communion. We're in 2012, and I'm giving you the same story that was reported in 2003. Nobody's shocked. The communion is already split, and now we're picking up the pieces.
I think the sad thing about this is that it doesn't matter who is elected Bishop of New Hampshire. Mm-hmm. If a gay man is elected, if a woman is elected, if a heterosexual priest is elected, it doesn't matter, because the damage has been done. no decisions will be, no great statements are going to be forthcoming if a gay man is elected Bishop of New Hampshire tomorrow. The church is broken, it's split, and people basically are now moving on and refocusing their efforts.
Yeah. And George, Kevin, how can you say that the church is split? By now, we would have had a letter from Archbishop of Uganda, Kenya, Rwanda, Zimbabwe. The global South would have reacted as they did the first time, in total, in unity to this type of thing. Right now, we are one day from the election, and I haven't heard a peep from anybody, not CAFCON, not any of the global South, not one clergy person. It's just accepted that the Episcopal Church has taken this route, the communion is broken, and there's not a whole lot we can do about it. Thankfully, as reporters, we could to see hope in other stories.
Yeah, I liken it to the Virginia churches moving out of their properties after the very long, very expensive, very emotionally draining legal fights they've been having. One of the stories that I saw coming out of this, somebody said, well, we're really glad to be moving out of this building. It's a blessing because, in essence, the monkey is off our back. We no longer have to fight over a structure. We can go out and win souls for Jesus Christ and share the good news of the gospel. It's the same within the Episcopal Church and the Anglican Communion. We can't do anything about the structures of the Episcopal Church or the Diocese of New Hampshire if you're a traditionally minded person. So what it's doing, it's just telling us, focus on winning souls for Christ. They're going to do what they're going to do. We can't do anything about it. Say, pray for them and, ask God to give them grace and mercy and illumination. But we can't control them legally or juridically or ecclesially. We can only do what is in our power, which is share Jesus with our neighbors and our friends.
Yeah, and I find this amongst all the people I know who are missionaries. They don't give a real hoot of beans what's happening in the Episcopal Church on the leadership level because it doesn't affect them on the ground. They're there to win souls for Christ, and they're doing a great job building, doing what they do. They said the only trouble is we've completely lost any respect amongst the Islam and Muslims because of the actions of the church. But as far as winning souls for Jesus, what happens at the leadership of the Episcopal Church doesn't affect us at all. What happens to the leadership of the Episcopal Church does affect the Anglican Communion, but not the mission on the ground.
In an odd twist of fate, this may actually strengthen the church, the true church, and bring more people into a saving knowledge of Jesus Christ, because we're getting rid of the externals. Who gets to wear a purple shirt? Who gets to be great grand poobah? And it's just getting us focused on salvation, not on power and authority.
It makes that grape and vine teaching pretty cool. And, we're seeing this, and it's happened throughout the whole entire history of the church, where God has taken a pruning shears and it trimmed off the dead and dying branches. And, we can see death in the Anglican Church, and we see it falling away. And we see people falling away from that. And it's kind of neat to watch our Lord regenerate His church, His bride, and make it beautiful again.
Well, I have a little tiny parish in the country. It's a real rural parish. We're growing. We've grown about 20% in terms of number of people since last year at this time. And what happens in New Hampshire will have absolutely no impact whatsoever. And we're growing by members of the congregation talking to their neighbors, bringing them to the church. People converting to Christianity are those people who are bringing us growth. And that's happening in a lot of Anglican churches, Episcopal, ACNA in the United States. People coming to know Jesus that's got nothing to do with the politics of the church.
George, before we get to the mailbag, let's talk about what the mailbag's going to talk about. Last week we did a story on Canada and how the Church of Canada is really closing down churches and trying to reconstruct their dioceses and merge their dioceses because people aren't going to their churches anymore. And we introduced the theory last week that one of the reasons, not the main reason, is because the demographics of Canada are changing. They have the Quebec problem. They have people moving from Newfoundland to find jobs other places. And one of the problems that the church in North America and the churches around the world have is their indigenous people tend to move around. They don't just stay in one place. Here in America, we have the coastal problem where people won't leave our coast, and those churches will never have a problem. So we introduced the idea that it wasn't just theology, although theology is a problem, but it was the moving demographics of the people who attend those churches. Thus comes the email.
Yes, we received several emails, 4 or 5, I believe, from people in Canada saying, yes, there have been demographic changes. People are moving from the countryside into the cities. They're moving out of small towns. But that's not the reason for the collapse of the Anglican Church of Canada. Places like Vancouver, which are growing rapidly, have seen a tremendous collapse in the number of churches there. And guess who's the bishop? Michael Ingham. That there is a direct relationship to the weak theology, weak doctrine, and collapse of people in the pews in the Anglican Church of Canada. And we had emails from people all across Canada, from Newfoundland all the way to Vancouver and British Columbia, saying people aren't going to church not because they're moving out of town, but because they've just had it with the Anglican Church of Canada.
Yeah, and we agree, that is a reason as well. We just wanted, with our story, introduce something new, knowing that most of our viewers from Canada are people who've been kicked out of their churches, and it's one of those strange things that our audience has been largely affected by people who take the doctrine of the church and throw it out the window, who take civility and take Christian history and throw it out the window and say, you don't agree with me, you're out of here. And that's a sad fact of what happens in the Anglican Episcopal Church. But there's other things that are happening too, and one of those that we're finding here in America and in Canada is some of the moving of demographics. It's not the major issue, it's one of the issues.
Kevin, I hate to say it, but I made another mistake.
S-class bishops, that's a new one.
Last week we discussed Bishop Todd Hunter going from the AMIA to the Diocese of Pittsburgh. And I said I didn't think there was a canon that provided for the creation of a special bishop. Now, we had earlier spoken in previous episodes about the assisting bishops that were coming from the AMIA into the ACNA, and that there was no provision for that under the canons. Well, I conflated the two. There is a provision for a special bishop under the House of Bishops of the ACNA, and I regret having made that error of lumping them all together.
Well, normally when we have to make a correction, it's been garnered throughout the whole world by a press release that we really screwed up and we need to repent and we're evil and stuff like that. Here we made
Agents of Satan, I think, is the word.
That's how it goes. Here we made a mistake in the Anglican Church of North America did the right thing. They called us, they corrected us, and they offered a special person to help explain, a person who helped write the canons and constitution of the Anglican Church, Phil Ashley. As George and I just alluded to, we are going for a correction here on Anglican Unscripted, episode 39. We kind of misspoke about special bishops and the canons of the ACNA doctrine here, and I have Phil Ashley on the line who's going to help. I don't know anything about canons, and I got the guy who knows everything about canons. Phil Ashley, help me out here. First, let's talk about special bishops, Todd Hunter, and other EMEA bishops, and how they're being moved into the church and what canons they're covered under.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you, Kevin and George, and appreciate this opportunity to clarify things, because I know we all want to be on the same page, and
Sure.
it's always frustrating to us when people do batter us around the heads, as you all say about Constitution and canons, because really we are quite Anglican in our canons. And let me just say one of the principles that govern our canons as we put them together, and that is the principle of subsidiarity. And in subsidiarity, what we actually mean by that is that we push everything down to the lowest level possible in our governance. So, for instance, in the ACNA canons, and actually the Constitution, in Article 7, we say that the powers not delegated to the province by this Constitution, nor prohibited by this Constitution to these dioceses or jurisdictions, are reserved to these dioceses. And that's in Article 8 of the Constitution at page 4. What that means is it's kind of like almost a Jeffersonian type of polity. You know, you want to limit the power of the central authority.
Right. It's a states' rights issue.
Exactly. And so, so any bishop in ACNA, like any bishop in the Anglican Communion, can call an assisting bishop under the canons and constitution of the diocese. So, for instance, I just went on to the Pittsburgh website and downloaded their constitution and canons. I've read through them before. But on page 18, Canon 7 says that the bishop of the Diocese of Pittsburgh, that would be Archbishop Duncan, with the consent of the Standing Committee, Diocesan Council, and Convention, shall have the authority to appoint one or more members of the clergy to assist the bishop in respect to the mission of the diocese. Said authority shall include the authority to appoint an assistant bishop. And see, this is what's happened with Todd Hunter and with T.J. Johnson and with John Miller. In the Anglican Diocese of the South and the Gulf Atlantic Diocese, they have the same kind of canonical provisions, kind of the states' rights, if you will, to call whomever they want as assisting bishops. Now, the key to understand is that those assisting bishops don't automatically belong to the ACNA College of Bishops.
Right.
The ACNA canons say, well, if someone's going to be a part of our College of Bishops, we have to vote them in. And so they're not transferred from a province to the College of Bishops. They're transferred, as in Todd Hunter's case, as in T.J. Johnson's case, as in John Miller's case, from the province to a diocese and to a bishop. And they serve under that bishop and at his pleasure. Now, in the case of, well, let me just stop there.
Okay.
Give myself a chance to breathe and you to ask any more questions.
Well, you know, how George and I approached the story is we looked at the ACNA canons.
You're right.
And that's where we stuttered. We didn't go into the states' rights, the actual diocesan canons, to do a follow-up. So we were kind of shortcoming in our research for the story. We stopped at the ACNA canons. Like a person doing a constitutional story stops at the Constitution.
Right.
And that's where we tripped up here. The bigger story is dioceses have rights.
Absolutely.
And bishops of those dioceses, like Archbishop Duncan and Bishop Foley Beach, have the right to bring on assisting and assistant bishops at their leisure.
Exactly.
Okay.
Now,
in my defense, it wasn't in the ACNA canons.
Well, but I do want to make a significant
Sure.
point, and that is when George said there are no special S-class bishops in ACNA, actually that was kind of a misstatement, because if you look
it's a big one.
Yeah, if you look at Title III, Canon 8, Section 6 on page 22 of the ACNA canons, it does provide for a Class S bishop. That is a bishop for special mission. And I know that because I helped draft Title III.
Well,
so
it says bishops for special mission and bishops elected by and serving directly under the College of Bishops for specific missionary purposes.
Exactly.
And the rest of the paragraph outlines their roles and
Right.
stuff like that. We missed that one completely.
Yeah. And and the other thing is that the College of Bishops is going to be very concerned, obviously, about bishops with jurisdiction, which is why Section 7, the next one, says that if you want to call a suffragan bishop or a bishop coadjutor, not an assisting bishop, but this is a bishop who actually has jurisdiction, well then, in that particular case, what you have to do is you have to have consent from the College of Bishops. So, so that's what that's all about.
Now, last time I spoke, you kind of volunteered to help me with canons in the future. And I appreciate this because, these are big documents, the Constitution and canons, to really dig through. And I want to thank you for, giving us the opportunity to talk to you about this and correct erroneous stories and help us further fetter out future stories.
Oh, Kevin and George, it's my pleasure to help out in any way. I do serve on the governance task force that has drafted and interpret these things. One thing I would just say to your listeners by way of a kind of a general comment, I find it amusing sometimes when I cruise the blogs and read people's opinions about how the Constitution and canons of the ACNA were drafted and who had a key role in it. And I just want to assure our readers we drafted them as transparently as possible so that we could make them in a readable form. I mean, if you'll notice, our total document is like 36 pages as opposed to the over 300 pages of canons and constitution for the Episcopal Church, and that's quite deliberate. It's a very minimalist approach.
Okay, George, that was Phil. He gave quite an extensive review of the constitutions and canons and how this applies to special bishops and assisting bishops and the dioceses themselves and their constitutions. Now, what's really neat here is, we misspoke, we were wrong, but they came back and they were able to use their canons and said, what we're doing is legal within our church. So often, you and I report on Presiding Bishop Catherine Jefferson Shorey, the Anglican Church in Canada,
the Anglican Consultative Council,
who don't know what the rules mean, stand for, and are always behind trying to change the rules. I mean, right now, the Episcopal Church is about 2 or 3 conventions behind the rules. And it's so nice to have the Anglican Church in North America be able to say, you guys are wrong, here it is. And we don't get that from anybody else we report on. So this is obviously a big kudo day for the Anglican Church in North America.
See, I think that we want people to understand it's not about Kevin and I being right. It's about the truth.
Yes.
And we want to share with you the truth. And when we make a mistake, it's not a moral failing that we somehow have to cover up. It's a mistake of knowledge that we need to correct. That's what we're about. It's the truth.
Amen. All right, you've made it to the end of episode 40. Congratulations. As you can tell, I'm at a different location this week. I'm being hosted by Father Richard Manise and his wife Martha here on the West Coast. I'm here for Anglican Men's Weekend. We'll tape it and put it up later this week. And I just want to give a thanks and a shout out to Father Richard. And here's the time that we want to thank you for sending in all your comments and emails, because they really helped structure the story. We got emails from Ireland about the Irish story. We got emails from Canada about the Canada story. We got a phone call from the Anglican Church of North America about the ACNA story we did last week. And it's every story got commented on, and that's really important to us because it shows that you're listening, but it also shows it's a part of participation of our audience.
Absolutely. We've been able to interact and dialogue with people precisely because they respond. Yeah. They share the stories that we've put out by forwarding this episode via email, and people contact us saying, hey, I saw this and that's great, or no, that's not quite right. Here's my experience in Canada. See, we're about the truth. We're not about publicity. We're not about building empires. As Kevin said, to me just a few seconds ago, we're not about building kingdoms, but the kingdom.
Amen.
And that kingdom is founded on truth, and we need to be held to that, but you need to help us do it.
Yeah, I mean, either that or we're the 2 worst narcissists on camera. But, here's the thing. If you want to get the, email updates every time an episode is published, go to Anglican.tv or go to AnglicanInc.com and click on the email alert button and sign up for email updates. And as soon as this episode is published, usually about 5 o'clock on Friday, that may change because I'm on the West Coast, but it may be a Pacific time 5 o'clock release tonight. It allows you to instantly know when the new episode is up and so you can watch it. It's interesting to note that last week our numbers are not down even though it was Mother's Day, so people were not taking the holiday off from watching the show. Yeah, those are kind
forward of... Forward is to your mother.
Yeah, obviously. Hey, forward to your mother. So thank you for watching. I'm Kevin Carlson.
And I'm George Conger, and you've been watching episode 40 of Anglican Unscripted.